This is the Brandon Smith Show, and I'm your host, Brandon Smith. And the entire purpose of the show is one singular thing, and that is to help you live a life that much more free from dysfunction. So today's topic, I think, falls in this perfectly. We're talking about something that we all struggle with, work-life balance, if there is such a thing. And so to help us on this discussion and this journey, I've got a great friend, a great colleague, social psychologist, executive coach extraordinaire, Krysia Waldron. Krysia, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. This is a topic you and I have jammed on multiple times over coffee.
Yes.
We have talked about our own struggles with this and decisions we've made to try and get closer to that. Mm-hmm. So I'm really looking forward to kind of not only getting an update from you on this, but how we can share some of the things we've seen with clients and others that might help the listeners.
That's great. Yeah.
So before we go too far down the path, tell us a little bit about you. I mean, I know you, but I would love for our listeners to get to know you the same way I know you. Tell us what you're up to these days, and then more importantly than that, how you even got doing this.
Yeah. So as you say, I'm a social psychologist. I focus on leadership and workplace interactions, and have always been interested in this since I was a little kid. So, but I, of course, didn't know that's what it was. I just knew that if there was a club to join or an office to run for, I was the nerdy kid who did that. So, as whenever you could start running for student council, I had my little posters on the wall. Have you seen that movie Election with Reese Witherspoon?
Yep,
I wasn't quite that, intense, but I recognized my ambition, in her character. So, and then the older I got, the more I got interested in how this is all working, So what kinds of things make us more successful as leaders and what draws us to it, and how to support people who really want to do it well. So in college, I was doing the same kind of thing, At one point, I was the president of 3 student organizations and involved in lots of other ones, and still didn't feel like I was doing as much as I wanted to. And somewhere along, sort of around that time, junior in college, I discovered that this was a thing. You could focus on leadership as a professional. So that's what I did. Excellent.
So then you went through the path of kind of getting yourself in this space. Mm-hmm. And then now as we kind of get closer to this chapter of your life, how did you figure out a way to create a life that allowed you to do all the other things that you want to do?
Yeah. So, that's a big question, right? And there have been some ebbs and flows along the way. But I think it's probably most authentic to admit that this is something, how to do work and raise a family is something that I've been thinking about, really since college. So I grew up with a mom who had a really interesting career. She's a photographer, but she did her work while we were at school. So we experienced her as an extremely present part of our lives. And but I also had that kind of pride in knowing that she had something that was her productive effort in the world. And she was really proud of it, and we were really proud of her. So, as I was thinking about career and thinking about how to position myself for a stage in life when I was raising kids, I wanted something where I could have a similar lifestyle, where I could do meaningful work and also be super present for my kids. So the decision to go to graduate school was made to this end, and to stick through it and finish in a place where I could do the kind of work that can be done in certain hours of the day. So it's intentional, and also lucky that what I decided I wanted to do turned out to be a need that workplaces now have, to the point where I have more work than I can take, and that's a lucky place to be. I didn't do that on my own. That just I'm grateful to be in a place like that.
Yeah, I totally get it. And just to round out the picture, how old are your kiddos?
I have 3, 5, 7, and 10.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So right in the middle of all the fun.
Just this morning, I was thinking I might have to call Brandon and tell him I can't come, because the 5-year-old had this strange pain in his neck that was piercing, apparently, and causing him a great deal of distress. And word to any parents, don't Google intense, sudden neck pain child. Don't do that, because what you find is not, it's not a reassuring
tumors,
set of search results.
Aliens.
Yeah. So, but we made it. We made it to school, and I thought, my phone will be off for 30 minutes, and I don't know what could happen in 30 minutes.
Oh, a lot.
Cross your fingers.
A lot. For anyone with kiddos, a lot.
Yeah. So suffice it to say, we're right in the middle of all that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about it on the way in today. I thought, gosh, when my kiddos were younger, so they're got 3, just like you do, but they're 16, 13, and 11.
Yeah.
So almost the same kind of age.
Big chapter. Yeah.
But when they were younger like that, it was like they just have a knack for starting fires. They light themselves on fire. They light them other people on fire. Light things on fire, figuratively and literally. They just are just really good at just...
The figurative part I've got down. Yeah, we've got that in our household.
I mean, you're just like, oh my gosh, and you have everything's fine, and all of a sudden it's not.
Yeah.
And so it's, balancing, managing that piece, and then keeping other kind of trains running on the tracks.
Yeah.
That's, I think a flavor of work-life balance, a season of work-life balance.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's a good segue into our topic. So when we think about work-life balance, maybe a good place to start is when you either challenges that you've encountered with that, or when you see your clients, what are big things that pop up for people when they're wrestling with this thing?
Gosh. Well, the very first thing that comes to mind is that this type of conversation, I think we have to have acknowledging that we're talking about it from a place of privilege, because the clients who are seeking coaching or who are in organizations that are sponsoring coaching are typically people who are at a place of choice, right? There's an element of financial security and then some flexibility in how we take up our work. So the issues that tend to come up is...
And I think, to your point, they have choice. They may not realize they have choice.
That's
and they may not feel like they have choice, but they do have choice.
Yes,
You're
there's
right.
sort of the sociological dimension of, we're talking about people who are financially privileged and fairly secure. Although, to your point, in the moment, we may be living a lifestyle that requires something that the work provides that leaves us in a place where we feel like we're not necessarily coming from a place of choice. But in general, the conversations and the way that it comes up is from this: am I doing it right? Am I a good enough parent? Am I the parent I want to be? Am I a good enough, professional? Am I doing the work that I'm expected to do? Where the trade-offs need to happen and what the right trade-offs are, and are the trade-offs I'm making ones that I can live with and be satisfied with long term. So I think they're sort of the big, almost existential questions about the role of work and the role of parenting, and not to mention marriage and relationships, and that the kids require so much, and maybe we can do 2 of these 3 things. We can work really well, or we can parent really well. Can we also be an excellent partner and invest in that relationship? And then there's, of course, the 4th piece of, if I'm doing all those things, am I taking care of myself? And how do I do that if the rest of it feels very intractable?
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned existential as you were talking. I was actually thinking almost like identity questions.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Because there's this, like, we hold up this idea of what it means to be a great professional, or a great mom or dad, or a great husband or wife. And we kind of hold this up, and it's like, and that ideal could be shaped by how we were raised, or it could be shaped by society, it could be in our own head.
Yeah.
And we try and match to that. Yeah. And usually that ideal is pretty darn perfect.
I mean, the ideal is not good enough on any of those dimensions.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but no, I think identity, in fact, sort of one of the most important pieces of this puzzle is that from an identity perspective, particularly for women, and I think over time it will be more true for men as well, as gender roles become more fluid and there's more flexibility in how we take up these different identities. But certainly for women, the identity around work and motherhood is the only empirically researched identity that has a different construct than others. So if that's interesting, I'll explain it. So there's a way of thinking about creating achieving an identity is really the way that psychologists would talk about it, that involves whether or not, so let's say, as an example, your choice of profession. So there are 2 main characteristics a psychologist would look at. the extent to which there was active decision-making in your choice of profession. So some people come to their professions because, they watched, their dad was, in my own family, my father-in-law is a dentist, my husband is a dentist. So if you had a parent who had a career that you saw and thought, okay, that's what I'll do, you may not have had an active period of decision-making, or you may have, but the extent to which you thought, what are all my options and which one do I choose, is active decision-making. And in the identity literature, it's actually called crisis. So the presence of crisis is one characteristic. And the other characteristic is commitment to the choice. So this can all be applied to identities that are professional or a religious identity or even a political identity. So if you think about all the different permutations of a presence or absence of crisis and a presence or absence of commitment, the only identity for which there is consistent evidence that you can have both an ongoing crisis and an ongoing commitment is that of being a working mother. So the takeaway is that it's unrealistic to imagine that for all of us, the conflict goes away completely. That there's a constant sense of, is this what I should be doing, or is this what I should be doing, and reflecting on whether it is or isn't.
Yeah. Okay. I want to dig into this a little bit more because I think you're right in that that struggle is real, and I see that with my clients, and particularly for women. And what I find is, and maybe it's just a state of where we're at, and as a culture and society, but there is a level of judgment and all from other women in different spectrums.
Yeah. I think the mommy wars are really self wars, that it is a much safer place to be in, to sort of point at all the examples of what is wrong, than it is to think really introspectively about how we're doing, So it's that sort of classic psychodynamic projection of, I'm going to point at everything you're doing wrong because what I'm really worried about is that I'm doing it wrong. So thankfully, my sort of read of that literature is that it's dying down a little bit, that we're getting a little bit more evolved and sophisticated in thinking about how many different ways there are to do work and motherhood and marriage and everything else. But I do think that the tendency to point at one another with judgment is really this way to protect ourselves from the vulnerability of worry that we're not doing it right, that there's something we're missing. Or that the choice we've made is one that we can't make differently or move away from or evolve.
Yeah. So we're going to go to break. And when we come back from break, I want to dig into this a little bit more.
Sure.
Because I think there are some things that we can be doing that can maybe shield us from some of that noise and those voices.
Absolutely.
And then make some conscious choices around that. But I think before we even get to that place, we really need to kind of frame up kind of how the sensitive nature of this topic, which I think is important.
Yeah.
Okay, so stay tuned. We're going to go to break. When we come right back, we're going to go even further in trying to help you reach work-life balance. Stay tuned. Hey there, this is Brandon Smith. I'm excited to be presenting at this year's SHRM Atlanta Conference on March 26th, 27th, and 28th. If you are an HR professional, you won't want to miss it. To say a little more about this event, here's Barbara Bell-Dees, a volunteer leader with SHRM Atlanta.
Hi, I'm Barbara Bell-Dees, the Vice President of HR and People Services for NASCO, and I'm also a volunteer leader with SHRM Atlanta. I serve as the EVP of Member Relations. Our 2018 conference theme is Be the Catalyst. We chose this theme because if you're like many in the HR profession, you are an instrumental catalyst for introducing, managing, and driving change. Invest in yourself and join us at SOAR on March 26th, 27th, and 28th at the Cobb Galleria. Our conference team has identified an outstanding lineup of facilitators who will challenge and inspire those of you who are new to your career, emerging as leaders, or accomplished tenured practitioners.
To learn more about the conference, go to www.soar.net. That's www.soahr.net. I hope to see you there. Welcome back to the Brandon Smith Show. I'm your host, Brandon Smith, and today we are talking about work-life balance. And I've got my wonderful friend and colleague, Krysia Waldron, on to help us talk about this. So, Krysia, when we went into break, we were talking about that challenge, particularly with women that are struggling with this, and naturally, men and women both struggle with this. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of elements around this. And I mentioned before we kind of dive into how we do this a little bit better, I think it's important that we kind of set the stage of how sensitive this topic is. Mm-hmm. And so I'll kind of add to this and see if there's anything you want to add to this too. But I've noticed that whether it comes down to people's choices around their profession or how they view themselves as a spouse, but particularly how they view themselves as a parent, that it's so sensitive, it's almost like a religion. Mm-hmm. And if you offer a different perspective, or if you even inadvertently point out that what you're doing might not be working, there's a very hostile reaction to that.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think in the spirit of our conversation today, I would want the listeners to understand that our job is to really offer up some different ways of thinking about it.
Absolutely.
And some options, not necessarily to prescribe, because there's no one right answer. It's more about what I'm hearing you say. If we simplify it, it's really more about making the conscious choice and knowing there's going to be some trade-offs and trying to avoid some of the noise that tells you you've got to be perfectly perfect in all spheres. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Yeah, it might be a little idealistic, but it sounds great. Yeah. But I think
if anything, I'm ideal. I don't know if anyone would call me idealistic. Maybe they would.
I don't know.
I've been called a lot of other things. Whitney calls me things that are not necessarily idealistic.
I think that
bitter, cranky old man. I don't know.
I think the noise is so loud that I haven't considered it possible to not hear it. What seems possible to me is to sort of get to a place over time and keep revisiting that place of being secure enough in where you are, and in recognizing that this is a journey and an evolution for all of us, that when we hear things that trigger kind of our sense of insecurity or make us feel hostile or defensive, that there's sort of some meaning in how important it must be to us. So I think that's why, of course, this is such a tender topic, that the stakes are extraordinarily high for those of us who care. I mean, all of us parents care deeply about what kind of a job we do for our kids. And we know we get this one chance at it, I mean, if you think about sort of the period of time that you get with your kids at home, it's pretty short. So I think because we care so much about the responsibility of doing it well, and you can't sort of go back in time and redo, parenting your toddler, although maybe that would be a nice thing to be able to do sometimes. I think it means so much that it's hard to hear some perspectives that might not fit with where you are in the moment.
Yeah, I totally get that. So let's talk about then things you have seen that people have tried that have worked.
Yeah.
Either for you or for clients. And by the way, when I used to be on Georgia Public Broadcasting and we had a call-in show every Friday, it was called At Work, and we do different topics. The topic of work-life balance was always the one that got the most callers.
Yeah.
Because they would call in.
I can imagine it.
So when you're trying to do a call-in show, I learned there's two ways to drive callers. One, get them talking about somebody else.
Yeah. Okay. It's always
because they always like that. So let me tell you about how horrible this person was or something that's happened. Or two, get them talking about something they did they're really proud of.
Oh,
and so everyone would call in saying, well, I figured out work-life balance. And they would call in a way like, well, so everybody should do it this way, which, as we just said, there's no one size fits all. But you get the most callers on work-life balance because people were proud. They were like, I tried this thing and it worked for me and I feel more balanced.
So that's fascinating because the coaching work that I do, I hear the other piece, right? I hear more of here's where I'm still struggling. The moments of feeling proud, well, in my own experience and in the clients I'm thinking of right now, they come and they go. There will be a day where there's a day where I drive around thinking, I have figured this out. It is perfect. It's as close to perfection as I could have imagined. And in many ways, the way that my career has sort of been developing and where my kids are and all of that, it is the ideal I had imagined. It does not feel like the ideal all the time. So there are days where I feel like I figured it out and I could, rattle off, do this and this and this, and it might work for you too. But then there are days where nothing structurally has changed, but I feel differently about it. And so in those days, I think, what's going wrong? So one of the pieces I've learned is sort of around that idea of conflict, which is that the presence of it being difficult doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It might mean you're doing it right. The reason there's a conflict is because you care deeply about both of these spheres of your life.
That's pretty profound, folks. I hope you heard that.
So it's sort of,
awesome.
There's
my head
that.
Is like phenomenal.
There's that stoic sort of sense of the obstacle is what's important. And in this realm, the conflict is what's meaningful. And it's not something to, I've finally gotten to the point where it's not the thing to turn away from. It's the sense that you're right in the middle. You're right where you likely should be. Now, there are structural kind of pieces of the experience of conflict that you can solve. So in my own work, I realized that my working hours and I had a lot of flexibility around when I was making myself available to work with clients, and that was causing me too much stress. It was too hard on a daily basis to have different working hours. So I bounded when I see clients.
So for you, what is that? More practically.
Yeah. So 2 days a week, I'll see a client as early as 8 a.m. 3 days a week, my first appointment is at 10, and I finish it all up by 2.
So every day is either 8 to 2 or 10 to 2.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And typically, given, I have this, you might say dysfunctional desire to be in lots of different places. So I want to be volunteering in the kids' classroom. I want to have time with my friends. I want to be able to exercise once in a blue moon. So because of all those things in any given week, I'll block time out of my schedule for lots of different things. It doesn't mean that I'm seeing clients 5 days a week either. But it certainly feels like I'm as busy as I could possibly be and still be healthy and happy.
So at a kind of meta level on this, it sounds like you've said, okay, I'm going to take control of my calendar.
Yeah.
And I'm going to kind of block off spaces for different priorities in my life. Mm-hmm. And then over time, kind of massage the calendar to make it feel right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Contracting or expanding different spaces.
Yeah.
Until you kind of say, okay, I think I'm getting it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. But I also, because I have mentioned to you, I've over the years been an enormous consumer of this kind of conversation as I've been figuring things out for myself. And I'm aware in this moment, as we're talking about this, that it sure sounds like I feel super confident that I have figured this one out. And, now that I have this schedule, things are so much easier and it works great. And you should try it too. And I do think, obviously, it is working. It's the best it's ever worked, and I'm really happy with it. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that there are still moments where that feels like maybe that was the wrong thing to do. I mean, we just had a conversation this morning about client work that I'm not going to get because I'm not more flexible with my time. So there are moments where it feels like, gosh, am I being too rigid about this? Or, so I think it's that flexing around and reflecting on, is this working long-term? Yeah, it is working long-term, but that doesn't mean that there aren't days or moments where it feels like it's not right either.
Well, everything has a trade-off.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to kind of decide, where do I get my priorities?
Yes. Yes.
I might not feel like I'm getting as much exercise as I want because I only have time to work out three days a week or 2 days a week.
Yeah.
And so there's a trade-off. I'm not getting the clients that I want. Mm-hmm. One of the as folks who are parents with kids that are older, one of my pet peeves that's frustrating for me is how much pressure we have now put as a culture on kids' activities.
Yes.
You can't just play baseball and have fun. You now have to train like you're going to be a major league player.
Yeah.
And so there's all these like imposed structures that threaten everyone's work-life balance. Mm-hmm. And if you're not careful, you'll run around just reacting to other people's calendars.
Yeah.
You'll be responding to other people saying, no, you must have your kid here by this time.
Yeah, I think that seems, another kind of piece that comes up a lot in coaching conversations is the recognition that we take on so much of those expectations as if they're our own. And so having a moment to be able to kind of be a little bit, get some perspective on that and be a little bit more objective about, do I agree that we need to be spending our time this way? Or, you sign up for an activity and you think it's one thing, and then it turns into something so much bigger than you ever imagined.
Don't they always?
I guess so.
That's the thing now.
Because that's what seems to be happening.
Everything is like, super. And so that's hard when you've got that piece too, because you say, and it doesn't help when competition for college is, we got all these things, and everyone's so focused as if college, the best college is the destination.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now, my personal philosophy, it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, it's not. College is practice, just like everything else is practice. Life is the game. So kids doing well in practice, whether they go to Harvard or Yale, is not going to guarantee, and there's no statistics that show the guarantee success long term.
No.
They just went to Harvard and Yale, and that's great. But you could be just as healthy and not go there. But I think that's part of the going back to identity. Do we see is success for us? And this is particularly hard when it comes to parenting, because how do you measure that? I can measure my health in terms of how fast I run, or a certain weight goal, or other things. I can measure career success. Measuring parenting success, the only thing that people seem to latch onto is college. Like getting into the top college means I succeeded as a parent.
Yeah. Well, there's a part of me that thinks, tricky. I wish that's what it was, because then, you just get real focused. But of course, that's not what it is. Although I do think I would offer that there is a way to measure success, at least the way I'm doing it at these young ages.
Yeah. Talk to me.
To me, it feels like I'm doing well as a parent when the relationship I have with each of my kids is growing. So what they're going to do in their lives, or how they turn out, or what challenges they befall, I don't believe I can control a great deal of. But what I do feel like I have some control over, at least now when they're so tiny, is my ability to connect with them in an authentic way, and to sort of get to know them as individual people and develop a relationship with them that feels genuine and like it's developing in a healthy way. And that's kind of a moment. You can be in a place of a great relationship during a period when the child is struggling with something. We had a recent...
Sometimes those are the best.
Yeah.
And you let them develop resilience, and they struggle through it, and you're with them.
Yeah, and the relationship is there. That's as close as I've come to any kind of measurement of parenting success.
So I'm going to offer an additional measurement that I also will use.
Yeah.
That, but also I want to attend to the fact that to do that requires being fully present and also time commitment.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like.
Yes.
But you have to, again, going back to the calendar.
Yes.
I think there is something to be said for being the masters of our calendar and not let it be the masters of us.
Yeah.
And so another kind of pet peeve I've got, folks, is if you are in an organization or workplace where other people are allowed to put stuff on your calendar without your say-so, which a lot of organizations,
a lot of places.
That's super unhealthy. That's
Yeah.
poor boundaries.
Yeah.
Like that's just, if you can, I would say no to that. But the other thing I would say about parenting, though, that I find is a metric that I've used, so this is only just for me. When your kids leave you, and they go to other people's houses, or they're with teachers, or what's the feedback that you get?
Oh, interesting.
So do they come back and they're like, well, that was interesting having your child over?
Feedback from other
parents.
Interesting, yes.
Well, that was interesting to have. Well, maybe sometime in the future we'll have them over again. Or do they say things like,
good,
they were so polite and so respectful, and they cleaned up after themselves, and because I think part of that's also a way to say, are you developing people with good character?
Yeah. Are you socializing
that
them?
are respectful and responsible and thoughtful and compassionate? Or do they throw temper tantrums and demand things?
Yeah.
So feedback from others is a back of the envelope metric I've always used. And I've cared more about that than athletic or academic achievements.
Yeah.
Because I've been focusing on that. But I think that at the end of the day, it's all about what do you want to focus on. Mm-hmm. So Isaac keeps dinging me that we are well over on time. And this is a topic that requires more than one show. So I'm going to have you back. Though first, we'll have to get on your calendar because clearly we learned calendars are important.
Yeah, well, we did schedule this one far in advance.
We did.
Yeah.
So I always ask all my, I almost said clients this, almost all my guests. I should ask my clients this, actually.
I would love to be one of your clients. Let's get started right now.
For that, Krysia. But what is a good life hack you would have for us on ways we could eliminate dysfunction in our life, either personally or professionally?
Yeah. So the one that comes to mind is sort of back to where we were a few minutes ago, which is to embrace the conflict that happens as a result of your desire to combine whatever spheres of life you're trying to make work, because there is. Conflict itself can be difficult, and some would even call it dysfunctional. But typically, I see it as a place where two important pieces are trying to come together, right? And so there's this sort of that therapeutic adage of don't feel bad about feeling bad. So if you feel bad, don't add more feeling badness on top of the initial. So in the realm of work and family conflict, I would say, acknowledge that the conflict is a part of this being meaningful to you. So feeling bad about the conflict is not the way to then move beyond it. But embracing it and recognizing what it means to you and what it points to gives you a chance to possibly do something different or possibly just, grin and bear it and get through that period.
Yeah, and hearing you say that, it made me think, just with all the moving parts in life, kids getting older, growing in your career, growing as a couple, changing health needs as your body changes. Growth and conflict is inevitable.
Yeah.
You cannot avoid it. So it's not like, what am I doing wrong? You just have to expect it. And so embrace those seasons when it's calm, because it's not going to last. Because you're going to get older, or kids are going to get older, or you're going to get promoted, and there's going to be new challenges, or whatever happens to be. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you. You are fantastic. If people want to learn more about you and the work you do, is there any place they could go?
I do have a website.
Okay.
And it's my first name, last name.com. So KrysiaWaldron.com.
How would you spell that for the folks who are
it's
listening?
KrysiaWaldron.com.
Excellent. And for those watching, Isaac will have that on the little bottom of the screen. So people will be able to see that. So thank you for listening today. Thank you for watching today. Continue the fight against dysfunction every week. You can follow us on Facebook.com/Brandon Smith WPT for Workplace Therapist. Of course, Twitter at the WP Therapist. iTunes, if you're not listening to this, why aren't you listening to this? You should totally download this. And of course, we have a new show drop every Sunday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. So until our next show and until the next time our paths cross, have a great week and an awesome life.